She could read every mind in the galaxy except 2 human men. And they shattered her empire. A soldier with a heart forged in fire. A scientist hiding pain behind perfect logic. And a queen who no longer knew if she ruled or if she was being ruled. If you love emotional science fiction stories with intergalactic love triangles, stay with this video. Because this story might just make you believe that even in a vast universe, the heart remains the greatest mystery. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Unreadable Survivor. Damon Foster awoke to silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind, the kind laced with birdsong or distant waves. This silence was metallic, cold, coated with the faint, acrid scent of sterilization and burnt ozone. His mouth tasted like copper, his head pounded in pulses that matched a distant electrical hum. Military training kicked in. Eyes shut. Breathe. Assess. Wherever he was, it wasn't Earth. Not a single trace of familiar gravity, atmosphere, or scent. The surface beneath him was unnaturally smooth, warmer than metal should be, almost like skin. He opened his eyes just a sliver. The ceiling above glowed faintly, made of an organic, pearl-scent material that seemed to shift color with his heartbeat. Alien. Beautiful. Wrong. His memory fractured back into place. The mission. The squad. The ambush. The explosion of white light. Damon sat up slowly, wincing at the pull of muscle and the cold kiss of the strange robe clinging to his skin. Not a prison uniform. Not exactly. He was unrestrained. Yet watched. 3 figures stood near the chamber's edge, tall and slender with violet skin that shimmered like polished dusk. Their eyes were large, silver, reflective, too large to be human. Their expressions unreadable. The specimen is conscious, one of them said. The language wasn't English. And yet, somehow, Damon understood. Not because of translation tech, he had none. It felt direct. Like the words had skipped language entirely and pressed into his brain. He stood. They flinched. Good. Where's my team? He asked, his voice rough. The tallest stepped forward. She bore a long crest down her forehead, glowing like moonlight. You were the only survivor. The Empress has taken personal interest. The Empress? Of course. What empire didn't want a trophy from a newly discovered species? I'm Lieutenant Damon Foster, Earth Defense Force. Under the Galactic Charter of Sentient Rights, I demand. Your charter has no standing here, the woman said, calm. The Imperium recognizes only its own laws. And your species is unknown to us. Shock flickered across Damon's face. First contact. Real first contact. And it had gone catastrophically wrong. They didn't know humans. They hadn't meant to ambush them. Maybe. You will be prepared, she continued. The Empress awaits. The journey through the ship was like walking inside a living creature. Corridors pulsed. Light moved like breath. Guards flanked him, weapons humming with unfamiliar energy. Damon kept count of doors. Pathways. Guard patterns. Survival was still the priority. They entered a vast chamber bathed in celestial light. Stars burned just beyond a transparent dome, revealing a massive planet below swirled in amber and violet clouds. Before him, on a raised platform, a voice rang out. "Kneel." He didn't. "We don't kneel on Earth." Murmurs echoed across the gathered audience. Weapons shifted. "Leave him," came a voice soft, commanding. She appeared like a dream wrapped in glass. Empress Naria. Her presence silenced the room. Her gown moved like light itself, every step illuminating the floor beneath. Her skin, a deeper indigo than the others, shimmered with patterns that pulsed slowly, like the rhythm of thought. Her eyes pure silver locked onto his. "So this is a human," she said, circling him. He held her gaze. "Unremarkable physically. Yet your ship's technology was curious. There's more where that came from. And my people will be looking for me." She smiled. "A slow, dangerous thing. Perhaps. But that is of little consequence now." She raised a hand, slender, elegant, and reached for his face. Damon braced. And then he felt it. A presence, sliding across the edges of his mind like fingers testing locked doors. Her power. Her telepathy. But as she pressed, something went wrong. Her brow furrowed. She pressed harder. He gritted his teeth. Felt her confusion, then frustration. She stepped back, startled. "Curious," she whispered. "Your mind, it doesn't open. It fragments. It contradicts. It exists in layers, shifting, resisting." For the first time in her reign, she couldn't read someone. And for the first time in his life, Damon had the advantage. He saw it, then. Not fear in her eyes. Something stranger. Fascination. And the faintest flush of color beneath the patterns on her skin. Two minds. Two labyrinths. And a woman who could no longer command either. It had been hours since Damon was taken from the throne chamber, yet Empress Naria remained still, staring into the star swirl outside the dome. Her thoughts were not silent. They spun, curious, unsettled, provoked. A single human mind, chaotic and alive, had left her shaken in ways centuries of rule never had. But now, there was another. The second survivor. He had arrived unconscious, body unharmed, eyes closed, thoughts oddly still. The initial medical scans marked him as human. Earthborn. But when the neural synchronizers activated, nothing. No mind link. No resistance either. Just a blank, ordered quiet. Like he had folded his own thoughts into impossible corners. She stood at the edge of the isolation chamber, staring through the translucent wall. Dr. Elias Quinn, the aide, said behind her. "Scientist. Civilian rank. Transferred from Earth's Department of Exoneurology." "Let him wake," she ordered. Inside, the man stirred. His breathing was calm. Even in unconsciousness, his body carried tension like a string pulled taut. He opened his eyes slowly, scanning the room without panic. His gaze passed over the floating instruments, the pulsing lights, then found her through the wall. It didn't flinch. It didn't falter. His eyes were gray. Pale. like winter skies that refused to yield. Moments later, they stood face to face. Elias wore the same shimmering robe as Damon had. But unlike Damon, he didn't posture, didn't challenge. He only looked. Like he was already analyzing everything about her, storing it behind glass. "You are Empress Naria," he said, voice smooth, precise. "And I assume I'm not dead." "No." "Then I assume I'm a prisoner?" "You're an anomaly," she replied. His eyebrow raised. Slightly. "Is that praise or concern?" "Both." She reached out not physically, but mentally. Her presence moved toward his mind like vapor through cracks in a wall. Soft at first. Searching. But again, nothing. Not resistance. Structure. She couldn't find the door to open. Because the door wasn't there. His thoughts were layered like encryption, non-linear, partitioned, deliberately arranged to route any intrusion into loops of sterile data. Like trying to read a library where every book rearranged itself on a shelf. She took a step back. His eyes followed. "I assume you attempted a mental scan. You know of our abilities. I specialize in them." "How?" "I've studied hundreds of neural patterns from over 50 species. And I know how to protect mine." She let the silence settle. This one wasn't like Damon. Damon had burned like fire, wild, chaotic, defiant. His mind a battlefield of instinct and memory. Elias, by contrast, was a vault. A fortress so cold and exact that even her most refined abilities slipped off the walls. Damon's chaos repelled her. Elias's silence unsettled her. And yet, both pulled at something she hadn't felt in centuries. Intrigue. "Why did your ship attack our patrol?" she asked. "We didn't," Elias said. "They fired first. We responded. Poorly, it seems." "You believe this was a misunderstanding?" "I believe misunderstandings build every war." She studied him. He didn't sweat. Didn't blink more than necessary. No emotional leakage, no obvious micro-expressions. Just a smooth wall of calm. And still, behind that wall something else. "You saw Damon?" she asked. "Briefly. In the lab. Before your guards moved me." "He is unreadable." "That's because he doesn't think. He reacts." "And you?" "I think too much." She laughed. Quietly. The sound surprised even her. "You find this amusing?" he asked. "I find it refreshing." She paced slowly. "I've ruled for centuries. My kind communicate through thought, intention, resonance. But I cannot predict you. Prediction isn't understanding." She stopped. Turned. "Why can't I read your mind, Elias Quinn?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then, because mine wasn't built for you to enter?" Her breath caught. "I'm not here to harm you," he added. "But I am here to learn. And perhaps, survive." She stepped closer. Too close. His gaze didn't waver. "You should know," she whispered, "I don't enjoy being unable to control what I see." Control is a strange word for someone who never asked what others wanted shown. That struck deeper than expected. Her hand hovered near his chest but didn't touch. Her instincts screamed to push harder, to break through. Instead, she let go. He had given her nothing. And yet, somehow, he had shaken her just the same. As she left the chamber, one thought echoed in her mind. One was chaos. The other was code. And both were dangerous. Not because she couldn't read them, but because for the first time in her life she wanted to. One moved to take the blade. The other stood still and disarmed it with nothing but a look. The grand atrium of the imperial palace shimmered with soft starlight pouring through the crystalline dome above. Courtiers in ceremonial robes moved in practiced elegance, their minds open, transparent, like pages in a book Empress Naria had read 1,000 times before. Except now, two presences wandered these halls that she could not read at all. Damon leaned against a marble pillar near the eastern wing, arms crossed, gaze scanning every corridor, every exit. Elias stood opposite him, silent, expressionless, observing with cold focus. A living paradox. One simmered with primal instinct. The other processed everything with machine-like calculation. And Naria stood between them. She had summoned them to this gathering as a test, a measure of how each might interact with her court. But what she had not anticipated, what even centuries of omniscience had failed to predict, was the chaos that would follow. It began with the shimmer of a cloak where there should have been none. A shadow broke away from the crowd, too swift, too quiet. Naria's senses flared. A presence foreign, unmarked, unregistered. The assassin moved like wind, his blade already mid-swing, aimed directly for her throat. There was no time to speak. Only time to react. Damon moved first. A blur of motion. He didn't think he lodged. His body collided with hers, hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. They hit the polished floor in a tangled blur just as the blade sliced through empty air where her neck had been. Then came a sound, sharp, metallic, and final. The assailant froze, his weapon locked mid-strike, fingers twitching, mouth open in silent confusion. Sparks danced from the enhancer node on the side of his neck, glitching, backfiring. Elias stood a few meters away, eyes narrowed. His hand was raised, fingers moving through a projection only he could see. Feedback loop initiated, he said calmly. Neural override complete. The assassin collapsed. Naria gasped as Damon rolled off her, lifting himself to his feet in one fluid motion. His hands clenched, eyes wild with adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" he asked, not looking at her directly. "No," she replied breathlessly. "You're welcome," he muttered. "And you?" She turned to Elias, still dazed. "What did you do?" "I rerouted the control node on his enhancer," Elias said, lowering his hand. "Turned his aggression protocol inward." "You didn't move." "I didn't need to." Damon scoffed. "Next time, maybe throw a punch instead of a password." "If you hadn't tackled her," Elias countered, "the kill command might have executed. The delay bought me time." "Don't make this about logic." "You were frozen." "I was calculating." "You were improvising." Their eyes locked. And Naria, still catching her breath, felt something shift within her chest. Not fear. Something deeper. Stranger. They had both acted. Both saved her. But in such opposite ways. Damon had thrown himself into the fire. Elias had extinguished it from a distance. She looked at one, then the other, and for the first time in centuries, the weight of decision made her feel small. A court official approached in panic, flanked by guards. "Your Majesty, we've detained the infiltrator. He appears to be linked to the Outer Rim separatists. There may be more." "Seal the palace," she ordered. "Initiate lockdown protocols." The guards moved. Orders echoed through the chamber. Naria turned back to the two humans. "Come with me. Now." She led them through a private corridor one the court had long forgotten. Silence filled the space between them until they reached her inner sanctum, a chamber carved from obsidian glass, lit only by soft starlight and the pulse of her own thoughts. She stood at the center, facing them. What happened out there cannot be ignored. Neither spoke. She moved closer to Damon. "You didn't think. You acted." "Yeah. That's what I do." She turned to Elias. "And you unraveled him without lifting a finger?" "It's what I do." Her gaze drifted between them. "Do you understand how dangerous both of you are to me?" Damon blinked. "We just saved your life." "Exactly," she whispered. She stepped back, her breath uneven. For so long, she had existed in a world where nothing surprised her. Where every motive, every flicker of deception, was visible before it formed. Where every ally could be predicted, and every threat preempted. But these two, they didn't fit. They didn't fold. And now, for the first time since her coronation, she felt something she couldn't control. Her voice broke the silence, soft and shaken. "I was never meant to feel this." One taught her to fight. The other taught her to listen. The council called it a cultural integration exercise. But to Naria, it felt like something else. Something more dangerous. The plan was simple: observe the two human anomalies in controlled settings, extract insights from their behavior, perhaps even learn from them. At least, that's what the court told itself. But Naria knew better. This wasn't about learning from them. This was about getting closer. The first session began in the combat chambers beneath the palace, the kind once reserved for royal guards and old blood duels. The walls were lined with force-dampening alloy, the air heavy with silent tension. Damon stood at the center, sleeves rolled, eyes already locked on her with an intensity that felt like fire pressed against glass. He said nothing. He simply handed her a training staff and took a defensive stance. Naria had fought before. She had faced assassins, survived uprisings, even led skirmishes on fringed moons. But nothing felt like this. Damon didn't hold back. He moved like a storm, sharp, precise, unrelenting. His strikes were measured but real. And every time she countered, missed, or stumbled, he didn't offer correction. Only the look. That unblinking, unreadable stare that said, "You'll learn by doing. Or you'll fall." And she did fall. Again. And again. Her body, used to projection and presence, ached with each collision. Muscles strained. Breath ragged. Skin bruised. And yet she rose. Again. And again. Until, during a single exchange, their staffs locked mid-air and her forearm pressed against his. His skin was warm. Scarred. Real. Their faces inches apart. No words passed between them. But something did. That night, she dreamt. She stood on a battlefield, not one of war, but of emotion. Two shadows moved around her. One blazing like wildfire. The other cold, endless as space. And she stood between them, reaching for both, unable to hold either. The next morning brought music. Elias had requested a chamber quiet, clean, with a console from the wrecked human ship. It had taken hours for the engineers to reconstruct the playback interface, but now it floated in the center of the room, projecting waveforms of frequencies unfamiliar to Imperium ears. "This," he said, as she entered, "is memory." She raised an eyebrow. "Noise." "More than that. Emotion encoded in vibration. Composers from Earth called it a language without words." He tapped a note. And the room filled with something unlike anything she had known. Melancholy. Hope. Longing. It wasn't logic. It wasn't code. It was the sound of someone remembering something too far to reach, but too precious to forget. She listened. And for the first time in her life, she felt something she couldn't name. Elias watched her reaction carefully, but didn't intrude. "Music," he said softly, "is the architecture of things we haven't dared to feel." She looked at him, his face lit by gentle blue light. And again, that strange tug returned. Not desire. Not yet. But the echo of something forming. Later that day, she passed them speaking in the gardens alone. Damon leaned on the railing, Elias beside him. Their conversation was low, but their postures relaxed. Familiar. She stopped, just out of sight, heart pric cling. Were they friends? Allies? Why did it matter? She was Empress. Her thoughts should not spiral like this. Should not burn with questions that had no political weight. And yet when she saw Elias smile at something Damon said, when she saw Damon tilt his head slightly as Elias responded, she felt heat rise beneath her skin. She turned away before they noticed. That night, the dreams returned. She stood in a corridor of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of herself: warrior, ruler, child, woman. In one reflection, Damon held her wrist, blood on his hands. In another, Elias reached toward her, but his hand dissolved into a light before it touched hers. And in all versions she was alone. The next session was different. Damon taught her how to fall properly. Not with brute pride, but with grace. Elias showed her how to listen not to people, but to silence. How pauses could speak louder than speech. The third night, she stood on her balcony, overlooking the stars, heart heavier than she could explain. Her advisor, Lady Thea, approached silently. "Your thoughts are loud," Thea said. Naria didn't turn. "They are not mine to quiet." Thea said nothing for a long while. Then, softly, they are both changing you? Naria closed her eyes. I don't know if I hate them for it, or need them more because of it. And below the starlit sky, the Empress of Seven Systems stood still, caught not between duty and desire, but between two men whose minds she could not read, and whose hearts, she feared, might be shaping her own. One wanted to stay and fight. The other wanted to flee with her. Lord Vexor stood beneath the war sigils of the High Council, his voice like a blade drawn in cold air. The human presence destabilizes the enhancer field. Their proximity weakens our linkages. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The data hovered above them in translucent projection oscillations, error feedbacks, unreadable neural waves. The human anomaly was real. We cannot allow their minds to fracture the unity of the Imperium, he said. They must be eliminated. Naria stood at the edge of the chamber. Silent. Composed. But inside her breath caught. Not fear. Something more dangerous, the need to act before the choice was taken from her. When the meeting ended, she returned to her private chambers and did something she had never done before. She reached up behind her left ear, found the note embedded in her flesh, and pulled. It detached with a quiet hiss. A flicker. A pulse of pain. And then, silence. Real silence. Not the filtered hum of 1,000 thoughts. Not the constant awareness of every whisper in the room. Just her. Her own thoughts. Alone. For the first time since childhood, she could not read anyone. And no one could read her. She stepped into the shadows of the corridor and sent for them both. Damon arrived first. His expression was already half wary, half defiant. Elias followed moments later. Calm as ever. She stood before them in a robe of soft crimson, not imperial silk, not ceremonial, just fabric. Unenhanced. Unarmored. Human. They are going to execute you, she said quietly. Both of you. Damon didn't blink. Vexor? Yes. He has the council's backing. Elias's voice was calm. He fears what he cannot control. So do I, she whispered. Damon stepped closer. We can fight this. Bring the truth to the people. Show them you've chosen a different path. Elias's eyes narrowed. And trigger civil war? Better than running. Not if the Empire burns. Naria raised her hand. Stop. They both went still. Her voice trembled, only slightly. I remove my enhancer. That silenced the room. She looked at Elias. What do you suggest? We leave. Now. There are loyalists on the outer moons. We can regroup. Return with leverage. Data. Strategy. She turned to Damon. And you? His jaw tightened. We stay. Expose Vexor. You stand before the people not as an empress above them, but beside them. Without the enhancer. As one of them. Two men. Two paths. One built on caution. On logic. The other on fire. And her? She was somewhere in between. She looked at them both not as anomalies. Not as threats. but as mirrors. "Come with me," she said. They didn't ask where, because they already knew. The star cruiser departed under cover of the pre-dawn nebula, its engines muted, its trajectory hidden. She had chosen neither fight nor flight. She had chosen the path no one could predict. And both men, one who would burn the Empire to protect her, and one who would outthink it to keep her alive, chose to follow. As the stars opened before them, Empress Naria stood at the helm. Unafraid. Unenhanced. Unknowable. For the first time, she was the one being read. The stars blurred beyond the viewport, silent streaks of light carved across the darkness. Somewhere between systems, somewhere between destinies, the star cruiser moved like a secret too loud to confess. Naria sat in silence. No enhancer. No thoughts but her own. And yet, she felt naked. She had spent a lifetime peering into others, sorting truth from masks with a blink. Now, stripped of that power, she was left with something rawer. Realier. Instinct. The corridor lights dimmed for cycle sleep. She didn't move. Not until a shadow approached. Heavy footsteps. Purposeful. Damon. He said nothing. Just looked at her. And something in that silence felt like heat. She stepped forward. He didn't flinch. Her hand reached his, and when they touched, the world stopped. No vision. No projection. Just clarity. It was as if his thoughts ignited under her skin. Not in words but in feeling. He wasn't thinking at all. He burned. For her. Every instinct, every action, every breath set on protecting her. Not for duty. Not for strategy. But because he could not imagine doing otherwise. It overwhelmed her. She broke the contact first. Retreated without a word. Later, she found Elias in the observation alcove. He sat in shadow, hands folded, eyes distant. He didn't turn when she entered. "You felt it too," he said. Her throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "Damon." She sat beside him. Close, but not touching. "He doesn't think. That's why he's so easy to feel." Elias finally turned. His face unreadable. "And I?" She studied him. And then, for the first time, she saw herself. In his mind, not as he wanted her to be. Not as a ruler. Not as a symbol. But as 1,000 variations. Soft. Broken. Brave. Afraid. Laughing. Bleeding. Leaving. Staying. Each possibility shimmered behind his eyes. And none of them were controlled. All of them were loved. It was terrifying. "You see too much," she whispered. "And you feel too much." She didn't answer. But she didn't leave either. They talked through the quiet. Not about power. Or war. But about stars. About childhood. About what it meant to not be seen and what it meant to finally be. He told her he had once tried to erase emotion from his neural patterns. To become pure calculation. But it never worked. Because every line of code he wrote eventually bent back toward her. And when she fell asleep beside him, she dreamt of nothing. Peace. Morning came. The light was faint, filtered through nebula dust. She found Damon outside the main deck, arms bare, breathing in slow, deliberate rhythm. He had stayed up, guarded the ship alone. He didn't expect her. She stepped closer. He turned, just slightly. And without thinking, without warning, she kissed him. It was not a careful kiss. It was full of unsaid things. Of fear and fire. Of needing something simple in a world breaking apart. When it ended, neither spoke. They didn't need to. But someone else had seen. Elias stood at the top of the stairwell. Silent. Still. His expression unreadable. But his eyes held a storm. Damon met his gaze. Didn't move. Elias turned and walked away. And the air between them, once filled with calculation and chaos, now bristled with something far more dangerous. A choice no longer shared. A path no longer united. I don't want you to choose either of us. I want you to be free. It began with a tremor, not in the stars, but in the voices. Council signals intercepted. Fleet formations shifting. Lord Vexor had made his move. The coup wasn't loud. It was surgical. Precise. A quiet detonation of trust within the palace network. Command codes reassigned. Security protocols locked. Loyalists silenced. By the time Naria accessed the main systems, she saw the truth reflected back in cold data. He had seized the throne. Damon reacted first. We take it back. Now. Elias stood behind him, silent. But something in his posture had changed. As if he'd already calculated the outcome and stepped away from it. They made their way back to the capital in stealth. Naria entered first through the lower citadel. Guards bowed, unsure, fragmented by new loyalties. The skies above the throne city glowed ember red, the early light warped by smoke. Damon rallied the old vanguard, those still loyal not to the crown, but to her. To the version of Naria without the enhancer. They stood ready. She turned to Elias one last time before the strike. Will you fight with us? He looked at her not with doubt, but with distance. If you win, he said quietly, you'll inherit an empire built on scars. If you lose, they'll never remember who you tried to be. I'm not afraid to fight. I know. But maybe you shouldn't have to. He placed a small device in her hand. A memory anchor. It'll show you what I couldn't say. Later. She held it tightly. But when she looked back, he was already gone. The battle erupted in the high halls of the palace. Vexor's soldiers, enhanced and brutal, pushed through the west corridor. Damon led the charge to hold the atrium gates. Naria, bare-skinned and unenhanced, stood in the center of it all, glowing not with power but with presence. Every strike she made echoed with conviction. Every word she spoke carried the weight of someone who had once heard every thought and now chose silence. Vexor arrived in the central chamber, flanked by a dozen mind-linked guards. His face was hard, but his voice, cracked with something else. You chose love over unity? I chose truth. He raised his weapon. But before the shot could fire, something shimmered. A whir of energy. A glint from the dome above. And Elias. He emerged from the shadows, calm, steady, dragging a device rigged to pulse. A bomb. One designed to overload every enhancer in the room. Elias, no, Naria shouted. But he was already smiling. You were never supposed to be caged by a crown. He triggered the override. The explosion wasn't fire. It was light. Blinding. Silent. Beautiful. In its wake, the enhancers shattered. The guards dropped, screaming, disconnected from their hive. Vexor collapsed. And Elias began to fade. His body fractured in light, already collapsing under the neural backlash. Naria rushed to him. He looked up at her, skin flickering like a projection losing signal. At least, this time, you understood what I meant. Then he was gone. No scream. No goodbye. Just a quiet surrender. She held the memory anchor in her hand, fingers trembling. Around her, the battle had ended. Damon limped toward her, blood on his side but eyes full of fire. He didn't speak. He saw the look in her eyes. The tears not yet shed. She stood slowly. Crownless. Bare. But radiant. And the empire, broken open, waited to be rebuilt not through control, but through choice. No one can control the future because it begins in free hearts. The Hall of Voices had never been this quiet. Once, it echoed with synchronized thought. Pulses of data. Collective intent. Thousands of minds linked in unity. But now, silence. Not empty. Not lost. Just waiting. Empress Naria stood at the center of the grand forum, dressed not in armor, nor in ceremonial robes but in simple white, untouched by enhancement or insignia. Her hair was unbound, her skin bare to the stars that shimmered through the open dome above. She had stepped into this chamber many times before. But never like this. No enhancer at her temple. No telepathic link humming beneath her thoughts. Only her voice. Only her heart. And they were listening. Aliens. Humans. Elders. Scholars. Former commanders. Survivors. Rebels. Children. And Damon. He stood near the archway behind her. Arms crossed, quiet. Watching. He wore no title, bore no mark. Just a man among many. But she felt him more clearly than she ever felt the masses because for the first time, she wasn't reaching outward. She was reaching inward. She took a breath. And spoke. We once believed that unity meant singularity. That order was built on thought made uniform. That to understand each other, we must speak with one voice. Her words rang across the chamber, slow, unhurried. We built enhancers. We crafted codes of truth. We created silence between lies. And in doing so, we erased the chaos. She looked up, straight into the eyes of her people. But chaos is not our enemy. A pause. It is choice. It is change. It is life. Somewhere in the crowd, a former officer lowered their eyes. A child reached for their mother's hand. A rebel blinked, unsure whether to nod. A human once told me, Naria continued, that music is emotion encoded in vibration. That it says the things words cannot hold. She touched her chest lightly. So this is my song. Not composed of perfect logic. Not filtered through consensus. But from the part of me I once buried beneath power. Her voice grew softer, but it reached further. I am no longer your ruler. Gasps. A ripple of tension. But no one spoke. I am no longer above you. I am with you. Beside you. She stepped down from the speaker's platform and onto the main floor. The crowd parted slowly, instinctively, as she moved. The throne remains, but not as a seat of control. It will be occupied by those you choose. By minds not enhanced, but empowered. She turned to face them all one last time. From this day forward, no thought shall be forced. No truth manufactured. We will learn to speak again, not with networks, but with voices. With eyes. With silence that asks to be heard. Her final words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. And if you must remember me not as your empress, but as someone who finally listened. Silence fell again. But this time it was full of something else. Beginning. She walked back through the archway, down the long corridor of light and stone. And there, waiting for her Damon. He said nothing. He just looked at her. And she looked back. Not reading. Not guessing. Just seeing. She reached for his hand. He took it. And in that quiet gesture, between two minds once unreadable, a future formed. No crown. No code. Just choice. Just the sound of one breath meeting another, as they stepped into a world that finally allowed hearts to speak for themselves.